If you're struggling to make your metal kick punch through the mix, stick around because I'm going to show you how to do just that. So earlier in my mixing career, I used to have a really hard time to get my kicks to punch through the mix, and I would just boost tons and tons of fucking high end, and it would just make it sound like the decapitated kick from Spheres of whatever that album was, Spheres of Nihility, and it was like super plasticky. I hated it. What I found out, as usually how it goes, is that it comes down to compression, and I really want you guys to understand that compression is going to be the number one thing that you guys use to get your mixes to sound pro as fucks. So the overall strategy for kick drum is to achieve a good punchy low end with a pretty good amount of high end clack or click. You don't want one to be greater than the other. You kind of want it to be fairly even across the board where they are kind of complementing each other. You want, how Christian Kohler says, you want the boom and you want the typewriter, and the merging of those two is what's going to give you a metal kick drum. All right, so jumping right into it, I have a trigger 2 here. We're working with my friend Eddie Song yet again, and this is just a sample that I've chosen and a second sample that I've chosen. 2 different types of samples just laced together to give me my unified sample. Now, that being said, I am really only using 2 plugins on here, but we're going to focus on the SSL channel. All right, so the SSL channel. I'm cutting off everything below 45 hertz. I'm cutting everything above 10K. And that is just to make sure that the super low rumbles below 45 hertz aren't triggering anything. You can't really hear them. So, you know, they're adding energy that you don't really hear. So you want to just take those out. As far as the 10K cut, I have gone as low as 8K, but I found that cuts out way too much high end. I feel like 10 to 12K is the sweet spot. You got to keep enough of the high end in there without adding any of that weird sizzle and MIDI stuff that comes with programmed drums a lot of the time. All right, now here's some of the key moves that I make all the time. 7.5K to 8K is always going to be boosted as a high shelf. In this case, I did a 4 dB boost at 7.5K, but that is very typical for me. Occasionally, I will boost 4.5K if I want a little bit more of a mid-range kind of high end. But as you heard, the kick drum inherently already has that kind of upper mid boost in there. Now, because they are samples, I didn't have to cut out any of the low mids or the mids. But let's say for the sake of argument that I had to, I would have cut out anywhere between 250 to 450 with a very, very narrow band. And yes, I would have gone as low as about 15 to 20 decibels of reduction in terms of EQ. When you're dealing with natural kick drums, you need to get very extreme with your cutting to get that modern metal kick sound. And here is the other key move that I have here is a 60 hertz low shelf for about 2.5 dB. The kicks already have some pretty good low end on there. I just wanted to bring it up so that it's a little bit more even with the high end that we boosted earlier. Now, moving on to the compressor, a 3-to-1 ratio is extremely typical for me. I have a very slow attack so that it lets the transients through, allowing punch, and a very fast release so that it's not affecting any of the tail end or the transients in terms of the release. And let's see how much gain reduction I'm doing here. So about 3 dB, and that's pretty typical. Sometimes I'll do 6 if I need to be a little bit more aggressive, but as this is programmed drums, you don't really need to add that extra layer of compression because usually you're adding that for consistency purposes so that your kick drum doesn't have this, you know, fluctuating motion to it. Now, as I've mentioned in previous videos, compression can also act as a low end control. So if I was to remove the compression, you would notice that the low end would jump up and it would kind of get a little bit out of control, especially on the double kick parts. So let's go ahead and bypass all of this and listen to how the low end without the compressor gets a little bit wild. Even some of the punch is gone as well. Again, that's because with the compressor, you are adding front end attack with a slow attack, and you're adding a bit of a layer of low end control with a fast release. So let's listen to that now with the compressor re-engaged. Way more consistent, way more punchy, way more even. Okay, and now I'm adding some saturation to kind of just smooth over the high end and add a little bit of low mids in a way that you can't really add low mids with EQ. Saturation is a very cool way to add those harmonics and kind of cascade across the frequency spectrum, adding those extra harmonics that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get with regular EQ. If I was to take an EQ and try to add low mids versus with saturation, it would just sound really shitty. I don't know how else to describe it to you guys other than you want to use saturation as a way to beef up your kick drum, but without EQ. It's really odd. I don't know how else to explain it to you guys, but just experiment with that. And for this application, I'm using Black Salt Audio's escalator. I'm going to bypass it in real time for you guys. I really, really hope you guys heard those low mids being added. Let's do it one more time. As much as you're tempted to cut those out, which I was too for starting out to mix, those low mids are exactly what you need for power on smaller speakers. Without those low mids, you're not going to get power in your mixes. And a lot of the time, I'm adding low mids in this manner with saturation on kick drum, snare drum, and bass guitar. Occasionally, I'll do it on guitars too, depending on what the mix calls for. But that is basically how I would mix my kick drums for punch and clarity. Again, I'm just cutting everything with a cut at 45 hertz. I'm cutting everything above 10K. I'm boosting everything above 8K at 4 dB. I would generally cut anywhere between 250 to 450 with a very narrow band, all the way down to negative 15 dB. Sometimes I would boost 4.5K if I need it, but this kick drum didn't call for that. I am boosting 60 hertz with 2.5 dB with a full shelf. I have a 3:1 ratio, and I have a slow attack and fast release, emphasizing the punch for about a total of 3 dB of gain reduction. If this was a real kick drum, I would have it going anywhere between 3 to 6 dB for extra consistency. And then finally, to wrap things up, I'm adding saturation with escalator to add some low mids back in with saturation, not EQ, to give it a little bit more power across the board. Let's go ahead and check out the entire mix with this chain on. And that's how I would mix kick drum for punch and clarity. So if you found this video helpful, give me a like, comment, and subscribe. I'd appreciate it, and it helps me more than you guys know. And I'll catch you guys in the next video.